welcome to the March Environment and Infrastructure Policy Committee meeting of Ellevate Louisiana. Today, we'll be talking to Julia Cormier, who currently serves as the Commissioner of the Office of Multimodal Commerce at the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development. And before she was appointed to this role, which we go way back, I've known her for quite a while. She was appointed to this role by Governor Landry in March 2024. She serves as the Chief Commercial Officer at the Port of Louisiana prior to this, where she led efforts in growth, sustainability, and economic development. She also has an extensive background in public service, having spent 12 years as a councilwoman for St. Charles Parish, which is when I met her. She is actively involved in several civic organizations like the United Way of St. Charles and Ducks Unlimited, and committed to continuous learning and leadership development. So we are very excited to have you here with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. Excited to be here. And before we get to, the Office of Multimodal Commerce, I just want to say, as Julie mentioned, she and I go way back, and my former life as an elected official is where we first met. And this all kind of comes full circle. I actually host still to this day, even though I'm not elected anymore, a group called Women in Politics at the Police Jury Association once a year. Julie was my first guest and just gave us a great talk, really inspired a lot of ladies. And, I still name drop Julie as my first guest so I can get some credibility when I'm trying to get people to come and talk to our group. It works. It still works.
That's very sweet.
I do. But, what you guys have in Julie, the leadership and the guidance that she has to give based on her experience is what we can all hope for. So just really excited to be here today and talk to you guys. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to it. Office of Multimodal Commerce. And a lot of those things Julie said, I find as I come upon folks in government, they still are not fully familiar with what we do. We're kind of hidden. And it's kind of been my mission over the last year to go on tour and educate people. Okay, so Office of Multimodal Commerce, of course, basically in a nutshell, what I like to tell folks, the Office of Multimodal Commerce is it's every form of transportation that's not road and bridge. So anything that's not ground transportation, if you will. Being that I came from ports, I knew that this office existed and I interfaced with this office quite often. However, the three modes of transportation outside of ports were somewhat of a learning curve for me. So basically, other than ports and waterways, which really are very important to our state, we do have an aviation division, freight and passenger rail, and commercial trucking. And when I say division, up at the top, you see planning, program, and outreach. When I say programming, that's a fancy word for funding. So we do have funding programs for these four modes of transportation. And that word commerce is important because our office does function in a little bit of a different arena than DOTD as a whole. DOTD's main focus is safety. Ours is commerce. So that interface that we have with DOTD daily, although we do function as our own office in a lot of ways, we have a lot of support that we utilize from the DOTD office. Road design, geotech, the administrative functions, if you will, legal, human resources, financial services. And then we have a legislative policy team that we do share with DOTD. So I'm sure, being that you guys are focused on policy, you've interfaced with that group before. We've had a few changes lately. Our newest legislative liaison actually for DOTD is former Mayor Greg Cromer. So he's new to our team. But when we go to the legislature and ask for changes, we're sharing that resource with DOTD. But outside of those functions, we really do a lot on our own. There are things that DOTD doesn't even want to know about. We try to keep that right hand talking to the left hand, but we do have a lot of specialty on our own. This may be a little small on your screen here, but this is our org chart inside of the Office of Multimodal Commerce. So I serve as commissioner, I have a deputy commissioner, and then we have our four departments. So we've got aviation, which is the biggest team, and that's what we're actually going to start with today. But we have a big team there because they are all trained in aviation. They speak a language that no one else understands, and they use a lot of acronyms. But that aviation team, again, focuses on funding infrastructure for our airports, which we'll get to in just a bit. Ports and waterways, we have a ports division, and we actually have a waterways division. Ports are specifically for those state-created ports, and waterways are to maintain and function waterways that may not have a port connected to them. We do have a commercial trucking division, which is really more of sort of a liaison between DOTD and the commercial trucking industry out there. Freight and passenger rail is what it's called there. We do have a freight, a short line freight funding program. And then we have passenger rail efforts that I know you all are familiar with, that the state has led for several decades. New things on the horizon always, but there's a passenger rail element to our office. So aviation, as I mentioned, we have 68 public airports in the state of Louisiana, which is a pretty big number for the size of our state. We do have 7 that are FAA certificated. That means those commercial airlines, those commercial airports that we all travel through, the Lafayette, MSY type airports. And then the other 61 are general aviation. They may be for, small hobby planes. They may be for executive type airports, and some function a small amount of cargo as well. So it's a pretty extensive network of airports in Louisiana that a lot of people are not aware of. And we'll get to this later, but I'll mention it now because it's notable. Most commerce is going to need at least 2 forms of transportation. So if it's ground transportation, it may be complemented by air, it may be complemented by by rail. So any of those things at any given time are going to function together and overlay together to help with our transportation system. So those funding programs I mentioned, these are the things that not a lot of people are aware that we have. Airport Construction and Development Priority Program is the official name of our aviation infrastructure program. So its focus is safety, similar to DOTD. However, we do want to always kind of ping that economic development button that comes along with aviation. So it's a 10% match, which is a pretty good deal if you ask me. There is an FAA, so a Federal Aviation Annual Funding Program, competitive grant program, but it's pretty easy. And most of our airports utilize this funding program as their match for that federal program to harness even larger dollars for their airports. So it works pretty well. This program is funded by aviation fuel tax. I don't know if you guys were paying attention during the special tax session, which I'm sure you were, if you're any friend of Julie's. But there was a bill relative to aviation fuel tax. Previously, aviation fuel tax was collected with a paper form, self-submitted, and the fine for non-filing was $100. So anybody in the state of Louisiana that was selling aviation fuel tax was basically had to be a good Samaritan, turn in that piece of paper properly, report it properly, and if they didn't, we charged a measly $100. So we put in place a 2-year kind of stopgap measure for this new aviation fuel tax collection. This was one that DOTD Legislative Liaison Group had to help me with. And basically, we are utilizing federal data. So there is a place that aviation fuel tax is reported outside of the state of Louisiana on a federal level. So we basically convinced the legislature to allow us to utilize that federal data and to collect based on the federal data of the fuel tax that was reported, send those invoices in, collect, and the penalty is no longer $100. It's actually 25% of those actual reported numbers. So there's a little bit more skin in the game now, right? So there's a little bit more of a penalty that those fuel dealers will feel if they don't report and they don't pay those bills. So this stands to give us about $40 million to fund this program versus about 15 that we had been collecting. So pretty significant increase based on real numbers, based on what we're doing in the state right now. So this should be a big help to the airports for this next year. They'll have $40 million to share between them. So should be a pretty big impact. So next up is freight and passenger rail. As I mentioned, those 2 initiatives we have. This is just a little bit of statistic on our freight rail in the state. We have 20 freight railroads. We do have 6 class 1s in the state of Louisiana, which is a very large number, again, for a state our size. ranked 26th in tons that are carried through that freight rail network. And then this is just a little map of that network, a few more statistics. So 2,667 miles of mainline track. So that doesn't include all those little spurs, those short lines, anything that's not a main line. So it's a pretty big number. And the things that come through rail, it's not our largest mode of transportation for cargo, but it does, like I said, complement a lot of things. Those list of commodities there, chemicals, crude oil, of course, petrochem, a lot of paper, bulk wood and lumber. Those are things that they utilize rail a lot for. And then non-metallic metals. So I think we use it pretty well. I think there's some improvement to be made on how we do utilize our freight network for our cargo movements, and we're getting there. So that funding program I mentioned, short line freight rail, is what we actually fund improvements for through our program. It's only a small $3 million pot. It's a very new program. It was created 2 years ago, but every year we've expended all $3 million that the legislature granted us. So we know there's a need. We've got a bit of a backlog. Those short line rails definitely used it to the best of their ability. Things like rail crossings, signaling, some real basic infrastructure is what they can utilize it for. This one is a 50-50 match, which is not quite as attractive, but still, before 2 years ago, short lines had no state funding. So this has been a really, really welcome change in the world of rail. On to the passenger rail network. So these are the existing routes for passenger rail. I'm sure some of you are aware that you can take a train out of New Orleans and go up to St. Louis, Missouri. But these are the three that are existing now. There are several in the works. I did not include a slide on those because their future is a little bit gray. There is some funding available for a passenger train from New Orleans to Baton Rouge, as well as a passenger train from New Orleans to Gulfport. So those two are the two that are somewhat in the works, if you will. At the moment, we have some funding for local stations. So the Baton Rouge to New Orleans to Baton Rouge, those locals, the cities, the parishes will be responsible for their own station stops. But we do have some money to help get them started, help with engineering, and help guide them. But I think we'll get there. And when it comes to the economy, of course, moving people is important. We've got to feed that workforce where it needs to be fed. So this is something that, it is somewhat of a priority. I just don't know that the state has the funding we need to get it done as quickly as some would like it to be done. So that's where we are with that. Trucking, like I mentioned, we do have somewhat of a liaison there. Our trucking is extremely important. The major focus from commercial trucking, of course, is going to come out of DOTD as a whole. They want those highways, they want those interstates, they want those parish roads to be in the conditions that they need them to be. They need those bridges to be up and operating. And again, that is completely out of my wheelhouse. So if you have an issue with a bridge or a pothole, I will pass that on. We'll pass it on to the proper party. And so the trucking division has a bit of a focus right now. The major issue that we're seeing with trucking, other than the roads and bridge, just fluidity, is truck parking. So there is a lack of truck parking in Louisiana. Safe truck parking, I should say. These guys have limited amount of hours they can travel every day. I should say girls too. These guys and girls have a limited amount of hours they can travel each day. And so they have strategic locations that they've got to stop, and we don't always have available what they need, which can cause a problem for just our residential drivers too. Those folks commuting back and forth from work. I'm sure you've seen 18-wheelers stopped at, on the side of the interstate near an exit. Again, we just don't really have a solution right now, but we are working with the federal government to try to figure out what we can do. And potentially a solution there could be utilization of our way stations. So we may see some movement in the way of, long-term truck parking there. So we'll see what we can do. And this is just a little bit about what the funding would come from if we do explore those options for the truck parking safety. So the big mamma jamma, ports and waterways. So we all know that, especially out of my department, those four modes of transportation, ports and waterways, really is why we are Louisiana. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have the Mississippi River. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America, whatever you want to call it. So those are really the foundation of what our economy is based on in Louisiana. The waterways, we are number 2 in the world, 500 million tons per year, 2,800 miles of navigable waterways, 2 deep draft waterways, the Mississippi River and the Calcasieu River, multiple ports, of course, amongst that those 2 riverways, 27 locks, 3 marine highways, and 30% of our freight travels by water, 8% by rail, and 62% by road. We don't have a statistic there for air cargo. And I think this is always an impactful slide. Follow those blue lines that come out of Louisiana. We actually touch 33 congressional districts. And I think that's extremely important to show when we're talking to folks on the federal level. Our impact as Louisiana, we touch and we help 33 congressional districts. We actually go up to Canadian province as well. So it's a pretty widespread range of who we're helping with our waterways and where those products are traveling to get to us. So I think that one's always important. So some of the waterways projects that are not necessarily port projects, the Mississippi River Deepening Project, of course, helps our ports, but it's been a standalone project and it's been going on span through actually 2 administrations now. The goal is to deepen the channel from 45 to 50 feet all the way through to the Gulf of Mexico. So from Baton Rouge down to the Gulf of Mexico. And what that does, it seems like common sense, but what it does is allows us to have vessels that need a deeper draft to come through. So we can get bigger vessels, we can get taller vessels, even with the restrictions of the different bridges that these vessels have to travel through. So it gives us access to different products that we may not have gotten access to before, and it allows us to export products that we may not have been able to export by water before. Another project is the Houma Navigational Canal Deepening. Again, this one's from 50 to 20 feet. It's basically the same principle, just different types of vessels that need to get there. The Red River Deepening, which is formerly known as the J. Bennett Johnston Waterway Deepening Project, from 9 to 12. Acadiana to Gulf of Mexico Access Channel from 12 to 16. So all of these have a wider spread impact than who they're directly in front of course, because those waterways connect to so many other waterways as well. So basically what we've done as a state, we've carried these projects. Because they were not connected to one specific port or one specific city or parish, we've carried these through. They're all very close to nearing the finish line. So we'll see a lot of improvement once these are done. I think the Mississippi River Deepening Project may be a year out at the most to really be completed. So
yeah, I wanted to actually ask about that because that was something that I learned a lot about when I was in the legislature. And so you'd say that we're mostly all the way finished with that. So and it's a continual process, right? I mean,
it is. The channel will be clear. There were actually obstructions more than just silt and mud and the things that naturally would occur. So there was a bigger project than they realized as they went through, but it will be a continuous process. However, those ports are going to be given the authority to dredge themselves. So they all have to dredge a lot of their batcher areas. They have the equipment there. And this is going to be sort of a joint effort there eventually. Once it's a full sweep, they'll be in charge of maintenance, which will be good because they can get it done quicker. They know their areas better than anybody else. We won't have to necessarily wait for the Corps.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that's it. That's a big project for the state of Louisiana. And again, I think it's important to note, although a drop in the bucket, the Soy Association from up north actually contributed $2 million to that river deepening project. That shows that impact that river has on, states up north, the corn farmers, the soy farmers, they all utilize that channel to get their products out. All of those exports, when it comes to the agriculture side, are coming from up north a lot. So it was impactful.
Julia, I have one more question about that. In regards to, you said that the ports are going to be responsible for maintaining that 50 feet. Are they then getting funding from the feds for the additional dredging costs?
Yeah, they will be compensated. It's not going to be some sort of unfunded mandate where they're responsible for it, but it'll be a joint, I think it's an MOU or a CEA that's going to be in place to allow them to do the work since, again, they've got all of their equipment there to dredge the shorelines. Why not let them go out into the channel? But they will be compensated. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And one of the things, like especially, and I don't know about the rest of the projects, but I know with the Mississippi River deepening, that there's a lot of places along the river that they're able to reuse that material that
Yeah.
they dredge up and then pump it back up onto the shore to help with coastal land loss.
Yeah, CPRA does a good job of that, that repurposing of the silt and all of the material. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I mentioned some funding programs. We do have a program that was created in 2017 for waterway dredging and deepening priority programs. It really is to speak to those areas that are kind of left behind, that may not have a port, a port to speak for them. Maybe it's something that the Corps is not recognizing. So it's sort of that in between. A lot of things in Acadiana have really needed this program. Unfortunately, we do not have any funding for this program yet. But when I took this position, I asked about the program. They said it exists. And I said, okay, well, have we promulgated rules? Do we have rules? Have we written a program? They said, no, because we don't have any money. I said, well, we're not going to wait for that. We're going to go ahead and design the program the way we think it needs to be designed. So when we show up to the legislature, we can say that we're fully ready. Please fund us and we can start tomorrow. So those rules are going through the promulgation process right now. Hopefully we'll have them ready by this next regular session, and potentially we'll ask for some funding to start this program off. Probably to the tune of maybe between 1 and 5 million. We do know after doing some surveying, we need at least 20 million to satisfy the needs that have been unmet by the Corps. But we'll start somewhere, right? We'll take the 1 to 5, somewhere between 1 and 5 to get it started. So we hope to see that in this next session, a good ask for some feed money, if you will. All right, on to ports.
I want to note just real quick that when you put a woman in charge, things get done.
Imagine that. All right, so on to ports. Again, another very impressive slide here. These numbers change a little, and they've even changed several times in the year that I've been in this position. But as of today, we have 41 port authorities with 31 active ports. We lost a couple, some dissolved, some of the smaller ports. But the deep draft ports, we do have 8. The lower Mississippi River has 5 of those 8. So I think that's, again, the most notable. Those are the ports that are our access into the rest of the world. So those are extremely important, but we never want to discount the value of those other smaller ports, because in so many ways they're feeding the larger ports. So onto our funding program. So this program, the Port Construction and Development Priority Program is its formal name. We've nicknamed it Port Priority. This has actually been around since 1989. Even though the Office of Multimodal Commerce was not created until 2016, this funding program has been around since 1989. So it's got to be a port that applies for this funding. It can't be any Tom, Dick, or Harry. It's got to be a state designated port. And of course, it's for infrastructure relative to public ports. That infrastructure, we make sure is tied to jobs or revenue, something that is spurring economic growth somehow. So we do have an economist that reviews this with us. This program is funded by the Transportation Trust Fund, So it's to the tune of about 40 million right now. In prior years, it ranged, I think 20 million was the last largest number before it got bumped up to 40. So we're sharing 40 million. And while 40 million sounds like a really large number, you just saw the map with 41 ports. So $40 million to be shared by 41 ports annually. And since 1989, we funded a little under $1 billion in infrastructure improvement. While again, that sounds like a big number as well. Port development, things that you see the headlines in the newspaper about, are to the tune of billions per project. LNG, all of these giants that are expanding that are on port frontage are in the billions. I mean, anywhere between 500 million to about 5 billion has been the average over the last 5 to 10 years when it comes to port development. So while we do appreciate this program and it has functioned very well in a lot of ways, we really need more, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But a little bit more about the program itself. It's quarterly. It's a reimbursable program, so a port can apply in January. They can get approval for the project, and they can get moving as soon as they get a letter. They can use their own funds, and then they can submit for reimbursement. So it really helps things move faster than the speed of government, if you will, because it lets those ports go ahead and get moving on what they know they need. Things that we do fund, most of the common things that we do fund are warehouses, the things at the bottom here, dock upgrades, bulkheads, just really port-related infrastructure. Oftentimes, those warehouses, again, they're going to create new revenue, they're going to create new jobs, and so that's what we really like to see. So I mentioned that it works really well, and we're actually really, really proud of that program, and we don't want that program to go anywhere. But I mentioned the governor gave us a directive that port should be our focus. Port should be our priority. We've got to elevate the state of Louisiana, no pun intended, elevate the state of Louisiana to the level that we should be when it comes to port commerce. So for the past few years, there were several legislators that were trying to create some new commissions or some new initiatives that would help make our ports stronger. This last regular session, Representative Mark Wright was actually successful in creating something new to give ports a little bit more leverage. He created the Louisiana Ports and Waterways Investment Commission. I serve as vice chair of this commission, and the commission is made up of several port directors, rail focus, road focus, and even aviation. It's got a mix of economic development representation as well as, real infrastructure related representation. So it's a good group. And if I'll say this, it's somewhat a jury of peers for the ports. And the focus right now is for us to create a strategic plan for ports in Louisiana, which we've never had as long as anyone can remember. There may be one somewhere buried in an old library, but no one has been able to locate a true strategic plan for ports that has economic development elements to it. So this was created. We've probably met 6 or 7 times, created some working groups, and it's actually moving pretty swiftly. The focus has come to be that the deep water ports really, of course, need more money, right? 40 million to be shared amongst some smaller ports makes sense. But those deep water ports need very large investment when it comes to their development. And if we're going to compete with Texas, which we all know is our biggest competitor with ports, they are funding to the tune of about $250 million to their ports every year. And we're giving them 40. And of course, they don't have 41 to share either. So just like I mentioned, I gave the directive to go ahead and promulgate rules for the dredging program before we asked for money. This is the step we needed to take before we asked for any more money. We need to have a thoughtful plan. We need to have a plan that makes sense for Louisiana. And we need to have a plan that makes sense to the legislators when we appeal to the legislators and say, we need $250 million. We actually need about 400 million if we're going to do all the things that the ports want us to do. So we've actually we finally got a number. Again, we did some surveying. We did some digging into the books of the ports, which was not easy to do, but they did open their doors and open their books. And it looks like we need about 400 million. So the status of the plan is currently that all the ports have submitted all of their projects. The next step is for this commission to basically vet those projects and say, do these projects make sense for the state of Louisiana? Do these projects complement each other? Are they redundant? Are we doing the same thing at all of the ports and missing out on pieces of the economy that we could be grabbing? So that is the next step. And I would say probably in the next maybe 4 to 6 months, we will see a final product of what the ports have submitted and what the commission feels we should move forward on. Because again, maybe we don't need to fund that standalone parking lot for that port that creates no jobs and doesn't really give up anybody other than that port a little bit of revenue. So we want to think bigger than those types of projects. And I think that's where we are. So we're kind of at a pivotal moment for the state to really look and be smart about this port plan. And we're almost there. So I think we've made a lot of progress since the last session. And again, I know you all see a lot of things in the newspaper about port development. We do have 2 container facilities, container terminals that are in the works. Do we need 2 in the state? We don't know that yet. Do we need 1? We don't know that yet either. So we have to be thoughtful about what we fund and what we stand behind. And as of today, the state is not in a position to take a stance on either one of those projects. One is significantly farther along. There's no question about that. But as far as us standing behind one or the other, we're just not there yet, which is not a terrible thing. But this commission should give us more clarity as to what we're going to do with them. So other than that, the 4 modes of transportation, those things that we don't always think that are connected to DOTD really are. And we're just trying to get out there and make sure everybody knows what we're doing. Got a great team behind us at the OMC, and just lucky and blessed to be part of a state that has so much opportunity.
Yeah, so very interesting stuff. And really, there's just so much more to it than you typically think about. One of the things that we've talked about in our committee, this committee, is the reorganization of DOTD. And we know that there's definite work being done there, and just wondering how all of that fits together with some of the work that you've done. And thank you for your leadership in trying to get ahead of the curve and get some of this thought process done ahead of time. So
yeah, the reorg has been interesting. At the very inception and the kickoff of the reorg, I think the consultants really didn't know what I did. They almost didn't have a clue that we existed inside of DOTD. And so we brought it to light, and that one of the first slides I showed you guys is where we interface with DOTD. Some of those hiccups that we experienced with those support systems from DOTD is where we were able to be vocal. Because we don't do exactly the same thing that DOTD does on a daily basis, some of those interfaces can be a little sticky. For example, a project number sounds very simple, right? But a project number for roads and bridges is very simple because they're doing everything start to finish. They're working with contractors. They're doing those things themselves. The projects that we are funding, we are handing over to the ports, for example, for them to do from start to finish. We do final inspections, but as far as the day-to-day construction, our office is not involved. So it was a little bit of a different animal. We had to try to translate that, and we're working on some solutions that would help OMC with those interfaces. But I will say this, Secretary Donahue is the best person to take on this bear that is DOTD, and it is a bear. 4,244 employees, huge number of offices and systems and processes that have been in place for so long that need improvement. It's a great group of people. It's just, they have not necessarily come up with the times. So I think it's on its way. But I see good things for DOTD as a whole coming out of this reorg. It's painful, but it's very much needed. And I think it's going to accomplish a lot of good stuff.
Do we have final documents on what the consultants suggested and exactly what's going to go on inside of DOTD?
Yeah, I think it's finalized. It was a lot of back and forth. The legislature had to review, the secretary had to review. I know when I say it's painful, I'll share this with all of you. The secretary had very high hopes for the final report. He has great ideas. He's very policy driven, very, very legal minded as an attorney, and also very common sense minded as a human. It was a perfect balance. The consultants maybe scaled back on some of the changes that we were hoping to see and put them on a back burner, a list of, maybe not urgent action items, but things to do later. So I think this follow-up list is going to be the key as whoever continues, hopefully it's Secretary Donahue in his position through the next 8 years. hopefully 8 years, can really just attack that smaller list of the minor items that I think will be so impactful. But I think there are 5 major components that came out of the list. I don't remember exactly what they are. Very procedural though. Again, none of them affected my office.
Right. And from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, and it's general enough that I think you would absolutely know this, but that we are going to attempt to take the personnel cost out of being paid for by the Transportation Trust Fund or our gas tax and moved over into state general fund. But that's a
Yes,
lot of money.
a lot of money.
And
That's
so,
scary to do in a sense, but yeah, that is
yeah,
one of the things. That is one of the things. One of
yeah,
the other items, of course, was to try to be smart with our money, right? We have to be smart with our money and fiscally responsible. One was relative to contracting work. You know, with 4,244 employees, should you really have as many contracts with outside consultants and people that don't get that salary every day? So tried to really streamline a lot of those things that we should be doing ourselves.
yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure if I had to guess, which is always a fool's errand, but if I had to guess, the personnel costs are probably between 300 million, 400 million. Like it's probably a lot.
I think it's under 4, but above 3. Yes, somewhere in
Okay.
there.
Dang. You see, I studied the heck out of that stuff. So there's
I
still
know you
some
did.
random knowledge hanging around. Yeah, I no idea where they're gonna find that money though, huh? Yeah, okay. That will be, and that's something that we can expect to see kind of roll out this session, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. And I'll tell you this about the ports. I mentioned that $400 million number for
Yeah.
port infrastructure development. Of course, we don't know where that money's going to come from, but we did actually look back at the last 4 years of capital outlay. Our ports have gone individually through capital outlay to fund projects.
Yeah.
Each year over the last year, they've individually funded about 100 million. Now, it wasn't a collective strategic plan that was getting funded. It was, this port coming up to this legislator with their project and getting their money.
Hmm.
If we put in some parameters and really try to streamline the port process, we may be able to come up with some funds. If we can streamline it into a strategic plan, just like CPRA does, right?
Right.
CPRA, if your levy project isn't in the CPRA plan, you're not going to get your levy project funded. And it should be
Right.
similar in the world of ports. So I think that's the
Right.
direction. Of course, at the pleasure of the legislators, and there's some good creative ones that are working with the commission, the new port commission. So I think they'll have some ideas and try to put a plan together to fund it.
That's pretty exciting. Let's see, there was one other thing. When a couple of things. First, easy, small project, the New Orleans to Baton Rouge rail. I don't think one of our board members is Amanda Spain, whose dad is famously got that train named after him, the
The
Spain
Spain
train.
train.
Yeah. Um, so did you give it, where do we stand on that?
So I mentioned earlier, we do have funding for some of those local stations. We actually have a meeting with Amtrak maybe tomorrow. That is to lay out the operating agreement for that train. So
Okay.
that's been a lot of back and forth, a lot of back and forth. But we've tried to be consistent with Mississippi and Alabama in how we set up our agreement, because we don't want to miss out on, maybe revenue we could have, or maybe we don't want to have as much involvement, but we wanted all 3 to try to be cohesive. And so it took a lot to have 3 states working with one entity with 3 separate agreements. So it looks like we'll
Yeah.
probably have that Amtrak agreement signed this week. I think the meeting is to finalize it, actually, because we've gone back and forth so very many times. And then the Southern Rail Commission, which is John is the president of the Southern Rail Commission, they are actually going to be the sponsor. So we've got a couple of agreements to put in place with Southern Rail Commission. I think those are still in draft form, but those are the things that are going to drive how Southern Rail Commission actually is involved in this, which they're extremely involved. I'll say that.
Because I couldn't help but notice that when you had that map of the passenger rail, that there wasn't anything heading in that direction.
right,
So
already.
is that we're taking freight rail or whatever we call it and using it for, because I swear I've seen Amtrak on there before.
You mean the funding? Are we taking the
No, I
funding?
mean the actual rail, like when you showed
Yes. Oh,
the
yes,
passenger rail
it's
line.
shared rail. That's part of, I guess, the challenge with passenger rail. Everything's going to be shared rail. So
Yeah.
CN, for example, has to give us access to utilize their major freight rail for passenger rail train. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
absolutely how it works. Yeah, it
right.
doesn't have
And
its own
then
rail line.
finally, one of the things that I did want to mention was about the Port Nola. And I know that back when I was still dealing with these issues on a regular basis, they always talked about how they needed better ingress and egress, from the port, and that everybody's got to get off at the Chapatoulas exit, and it's just like a kind of a nightmare getting in and out of there. Is that anywhere on the time horizon?
So you mean ground transportation that's
Yeah.
coming in and out of the port? The Port of New Orleans has not really appealed to us with any ask for additional ground transportation projects at this moment. They even can divert, if they have some additional dock locations in the near future, they can divert some of that to some other dock locations that may use a different truck access. So not so much do we need to change the ingress egress plan physically, but maybe divert the traffic itself in a different way. And so if those vessels can go to some different docks, which they're hoping for and planning for, then those trucks would be utilizing different ground outlets. Again, their container facility is potentially got a planned additional dock for some other activity outside of containers. That would be one of the solutions.
We just thank you so much for sharing this information with us today. I'm really encouraged to have you in this leadership position, and I feel like you're going to get some great things done and get us organized. Exciting.
Right. That's right. And I'm here for anything in the future as as you get through session and you guys have questions about things that might have elements in my office. I'm happy to weigh in and share and even voice your concerns. So happy to be part of this.
We're really excited about it and really appreciate it. And for all of you listening, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. If you're interested in these types of policy talks, check us out at Ellevate Louisiana's website, where you can learn more about our events, our policy committees, advocacy efforts, and how to join. Again, that website is ELLEVATELA.org. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember that big changes start with informed conversations. Keep the dialogue going, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.